In the late 2000s, online banking was becoming normal for everyday life. People paid bills at home, companies handled payroll through web portals, and log in and confirm became a daily habit. That convenience also created a new kind of risk. If someone could quietly slip into the space between a person and their bank website, they could capture what looked like ordinary logins and turn them into something harmful. That is the world where Zeus, often called Zbot, became one of the most talked about banking Trojans. Early public reporting and later security research describe Zeus not as a single one-off virus, but as a toolkit that could be adapted and resold, allowing many criminal groups to run similar campaigns with their own targets and styles. Over time, Zeus became less like one piece of malware and more like a shared method, an approach used to steal banking credentials from infected Windows computers through techniques that focused on the web browser itself. The beginning of a Zeus story often looked ordinary. A small business employee receives a plausible message. A home user is lured into opening a file that appears routine, or a compromised website triggers an unwanted download in the background. The person might notice nothing unusual. Their computer keeps working, their browser still opens, their banking page still loads. That normal feeling mattered because Zeus was designed to be quiet. If a threat is loud, people react. If it is silent, people continue their routines, and routines create opportunities. As Zeus spread, it was linked in public accounts to real losses across many victims, from individuals to municipalities and businesses. In October 2010, Federal Bureau of Investigation publicly discussed Zeus-related activity in a broader effort against cyber-enabled bank theft, emphasizing how attackers used compromised systems and stolen credentials to drain accounts through fraudulent transfers. Even in that period, the story was already clear. The technical tool mattered, but the larger system of deception mattered even more. From an educational perspective, Zeus is important because it showed how bank security is not only a bank's responsibility. If a customer's computer becomes compromised, the attacker may ride on top of the customer's legitimate session. That means the bank sees a correct login from a real customer doing actions that appear valid. In other words, Zeus pushed defenders to think about the whole chain of trust: device, browser, session, and behavior, not only username and password. It also showed a hard truth about scale. A single criminal group might only reach a limited number of people, but a toolkit that spreads, copied, repackaged, and reused can create an ecosystem. One campaign ends, another begins. One variant fades, another takes its place. And as long as the human habit remains the same, click quickly, trust the familiar, move on, then the opportunity remains. So part one ends with a quiet warning, not a dramatic one. Zeus did not become famous because it was flashy. Zeus became famous because it was practical. It blended into normal online life, and it used that normal life as its cover. If Zeus had been only one piece of code, it might have disappeared the way many threats do, discovered, removed, forgotten. Instead, it became something more durable. Security researchers and threat references describe Zeus as a malware family that evolved over time, with new components and variants appearing as defenders improved. What began as a banking credential thief expanded into a broader package that could include multiple capabilities and flexible delivery methods. This is where the story becomes less about a virus and more about an underground business model. Zeus was widely discussed as a toolkit that could be configured, meaning operators could choose which banks to target, which pages to watch, and what kind of data to capture. That configurability made it attractive to criminals who were not expert programmers but were willing to run campaigns. In a sense, Zeus helped lower the barrier to entry for online bank theft, not by making it easy for the public, but by making it easier for organized cybercrime groups to industrialize their operations. The educational lesson here is about incentives. When criminal activity becomes modular, where one group writes code, another distributes it, and another turns stolen access into profit, it starts to resemble a supply chain. Taking down one part does not necessarily stop the whole. Disrupt one distributor and another takes over. Arrest one operator and a different crew buys the same toolkit. During this era, defenders also learned how strongly attackers relied on trust signals. People trust familiar logos. They trust the feeling of, I've logged in here before. They trust the normal sequence of a website asking for details. Zeus abused that trust by trying to stay within the browser experience, where users are least likely to imagine an invisible observer. At the same time, banks and security teams began improving detection and protection. Stronger authentication became more common. Transaction verification steps improved. Monitoring for unusual behavior expanded. But the criminals adapted too. When a defense blocked the easiest route, they looked for new routes that still felt normal to the victim. This is also why Zeus is often described as one of the oldest and most persistent banking Trojans, because the name Zeus came to represent not only one code base, but a lineage of techniques and variants. By the early 2010s, security researchers were seeing an evolution toward more resilient infrastructure, ways for infected machines to receive updates, instructions, and configuration changes, even when defenders tried to block central servers. The stage was set for a more durable offspring of Zeus, one that would become notorious for its resilience and its scale. That offspring was often called Gameover Zeus. Gameover Zeus, often abbreviated as GOZ, became well known because it shifted away from a simple, centralized structure. Public descriptions and security analysis emphasized that GOZ used a decentralized peer-to-peer approach that made disruption much harder. Instead of every infected machine relying on one obvious command server, the infected machines could help pass information among themselves, like a distributed network that could keep operating even when parts were removed. For investigators and defenders, this mattered because it changed the nature of takedowns. In earlier eras, shutting down a few servers could cripple a campaign. With peer-to-peer coordination, the campaign could be more resilient. If one node disappeared, others continued. If one route failed, another route could be tried. This increased the time and effort needed to understand the network, map its behavior, and design a response that would actually work. Security write-ups described additional fallback techniques as well, including the use of domain generation methods, ways to produce many possible domain names so operators could switch rapidly if defenders blocked a few. One industry analysis explained that if peer-to-peer contact failed, GOZ could fall back to generated domains across multiple top-level domains, adding another layer of resilience. The story of GOZ is also a story of patience. Much like other sophisticated banking threats, it aimed to remain unnoticed as long as possible. It was not trying to announce itself. The longer it stayed quiet, the more chances it had to harvest credentials and ride along with legitimate online banking sessions. For education-focused storytelling, the key point is not the technical detail. The key point is the design philosophy. Build a system that keeps functioning even while defenders push back. That philosophy shows why certain cyber threats persist for years, because they are not built like a single machine, they are built like a network. This is also the part of the story where attribution entered the public narrative. In connection with the 2014 disruption effort, authorities publicly named an alleged administrator, Evgeny Mikhailovich Bogachev, and described him as linked to the operation. Whether one focuses on individuals or infrastructure, GOZ became an example of how cybercrime groups pursued resilience, distribute control, add fallbacks, reduced single points of failure, and keep the operation running long enough to profit. And as GOZ grew, it became connected in public accounts not only to banking theft, but also to a second wave of harm that affected victims in a different way, one that would broaden the story far beyond online banking. By 2013, public reporting and security research described a troubling pattern. Gameover Zeus was used not only for stealing banking credentials, but also as a channel to distribute CryptoLocker, one of the best-known ransomware families of its era. In other words, The same infection pathway that might begin with a banking credential theft attempt could later lead to a different kind of pressure on the victim. This matters for the educational arc of the story because it illustrates how criminals diversify. If one path to profit is difficult, say banking fraud requiring laundering networks and operational complexity, another path may look simpler from the criminal's perspective. Security discussions around GOZ noted that ransomware could extract payment without the same need for complicated cash-out structures, since the payment methods could be designed to be harder to trace. Told gently and responsibly, the key point is this: victims were not only targeted for what criminals could steal from bank accounts, but also for what victims valued on their own computers. Personal files, business documents, and irreplaceable work became leverage. That shift expanded the harm beyond the banking system into everyday life and small business operations. For defenders, this phase highlighted the importance of layered preparation. Endpoint protection matters because the compromise begins on a device. Backups matter because they reduce the leverage criminals gain. Network monitoring matters because it helps identify unusual internal activity early. User awareness matters because initial access often begins with persuasion. In the GOZ era, defenders began to treat certain banking malware families as platforms rather than tools. A platform can deliver multiple payloads. It can evolve. It can shift business models. And it can do so quickly when defenders disrupt one revenue stream. So the story is not only Zeus stole credentials, the story becomes a long-running malware lineage evolved into a resilient network, and that network could support multiple forms of cybercrime. That escalating complexity made the next chapter inevitable, a coordinated international disruption effort designed not as a single strike, but as a carefully prepared operation involving many partners. On June 2, 2014, the U.S. Department of Justice announced a multinational effort to disrupt the Gameover Zeus botnet, alongside actions related to CryptoLocker. The announcement emphasized that GOZ had been used to steal millions of dollars from businesses and consumers worldwide, and it described the coordinated nature of the disruption campaign. This effort is often referred to as Operation Tovar. What made it notable was not only the scale, but also the collaboration. Law enforcement working alongside private cybersecurity firms and researchers. The broader lesson here is about capability. No single organization typically has complete visibility into a global botnet. Internet infrastructure crosses borders, legal jurisdictions differ, and technical details are distributed across many networks. Cooperation becomes a necessity, not a bonus. Public summaries described the operation as disrupting communication between infected machines and criminal infrastructure, including redirecting or sinkholing traffic to servers controlled by authorities and partners. The goal was to break the botnet's ability to function at scale, at least temporarily, and to give defenders time to clean systems and improve protections. From an educational viewpoint, the most interesting part is the timeline. Planning and preparation mattered. GLE's resilience meant responders couldn't improvise on the day of action. They needed intelligence, coordination, and a strategy that addressed both peer-to-peer behavior and fallback mechanisms. Industry analysis of GOZ discussed the role of its fallback domain generation methods, highlighting why defenders had to think ahead rather than only reacting. The disruption also underlined a calm but critical message for the public. Takedowns are rarely permanent. Even after major operations, criminals can attempt to rebuild, reuse ideas, or reassemble networks in new forms. So the win is not only the takedown moment, it is the improvements made afterward: faster detection, better endpoint security, stronger authentication, and stronger recovery processes. Operation Tovar became a landmark because it demonstrated what coordinated defense could look like against a resilient global criminal network. The Zeus story and the later Gameover Zeus chapter remain important because they represent a turning point in how the world understood financial cybercrime. Zeus showed that a user's device could become the weak link in online banking. Gameover Zeus showed that criminal infrastructure could be built for resilience, not just for speed. And the broader narrative showed how a single malware lineage could evolve into a platform supporting multiple kinds of harm. In documentary terms, the most valuable lesson is not technical, it is behavioral. Zeus succeeded because it lived inside routine. Everyday logins, everyday browsing, everyday clicking. It reminded defenders that trust is something criminals try to imitate. If a bank only checks, "Did the password match?" a compromised device can still make the session look legitimate. That led to wider adoption of multi-factor authentication, risk-based login checks, and transaction verification that looks at context, not just credentials. Gameover Zeus added a different warning. Defenders must assume adversaries will design for survival. Peer-to-peer structures, fallback communication, and rapid adaptation are not rare ideas anymore. The battlefield is not a single server. It is a distributed system spread across many machines and networks. The response, therefore, also has to be layered. Protect endpoints, because the story often begins there. Monitor behavior, because credentials alone can be misleading, segment systems because the most sensitive tools should never be reachable from ordinary browsing environments, prepare recovery because quick restoration reduces the damage criminals can cause, and share intelligence because no single organization sees the whole picture. Finally, the Zeus narrative offers a calm reassurance. Defenders also learn. Each campaign teaches patterns, each disruption improves methods, and each improvement, repeated across many institutions, shrinks the space where long-running threats can hide. That is the quiet ending to a quiet kind of crime story. Not panic, not drama, just steady learning, steady improvements, and a recognition that the safest systems are the ones designed with human routines in mind.